See if I can. I'm just going to test my ability to advance slides with this. Oh, good. I can. Huh. Sorry. Little preview there.
That's all right. Thank you. Right. So welcome everyone to our webinar. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. I think we'll wait till about 2 or 3 after. And that'll give people time to get their lunch and get settled. And we'll be starting momentarily. While we're waiting, if you want to drop your location and what you're hoping to get out of today's webinar in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. Anyone joining us from outside the US today? California. Awesome. Yeah, if you want to drop your location in the chat. UK.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah. Another UK person, Glasgow, Scotland. Jay's coming to us from the faraway land of Raytown. For those outside of the KC area, that's a suburb here. Quite a few people from the UK today, Patty.
Interesting. That's quite interesting. I'm going to be talking mostly about around here. So,
But I think it's easy enough to let people know how they can find their information for their local area.
yeah.
Couple people from California. So that's awesome.
That is awesome. Very cool.
Houston, Texas. Yeah, we'd just be curious to see where you're coming from and where you're currently sitting. I think we'll wait just one more minute and then I'm going to do a quick overview of Re.Useful and then I'll let you take it away, Patty.
Perfect.
Kelly, do you happen to be related to Mary Kay?
No.
Okay.
very few of us here.
Well, she's a Moro, so I was just wondering.
Not a common name.
It isn't. All right, well, it's 3 after, and we still have some people coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. If you haven't yet, we'd love to know where you're joining us from and if there's anything from today's webinar that you're hoping to get out of it specifically. Welcome to all our UK friends. I know I am always inspired by English gardens that I see on all the British shows I watch. So welcome everyone. I'm Leslie Scott. I'm the founder of Reuseful. And since we have so many people from all over really the world, I don't want to go too deep into what we do at Reuseful because it's very much Kansas City centric, but we do these webinars twice a month on the first Wednesday and the third Wednesday. And today we're going to be talking about pollinators and native plants. But we are just a nonprofit organization trying to help people live a more sustainable life. So whether that's through these webinars or we have in-person events where we are helping people get free repairs on broken items, as well as on Dumpster Day, which is a one-stop donation collection event where we bring together some of our charity partners to collect still good items, as well as offer free tire recycling, electronics recycling, and paper shredding. So that's what we do at Reuseful. And we started these webinars a few years ago, just to touch on different sustainability focused topics. And today has been a very popular topic, and I'm excited to have Patti Ragsdale here, and she's from Botanical Belonging. So, Patti, floor is all yours.
Awesome. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. Of course, I'm probably speaking to the choir about why this concept is important. But let me share a little bit about me. See if I can advance slides here. Yeah. Um, as Leslie said, I am the founder of Botanical Belonging. I'm also the president of the Kansas Native Plant Society. Um, I've been a master naturalist out of Johnson County, Kansas for 7 years. I volunteered a lot of time there prior to founding Botanical Belonging. I was the creator of a native plant nursery that was called Happy Apples Farm. But we decided to shift that over to a nonprofit so I could focus more on education about native plants and the pollinators that love them and need them. Um, but most of my career was spent as a graphic designer. Prior to that, I had studied wildlife management, which is how I got involved with native plants, because you might not know, but supporting wildlife is all about creating habitat. And native plants are a big part of that. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that why native plants are important and who some of those pollinators are that need them, and a little bit about why choosing native plants and creating these habitat and gardens is important to them. So the first thing we're going to cover is a little bit of a downer, just going to warn you. The reason why we need native plants in our landscape is habitat loss. The reality is that a lot of studies, specifically Xerces Society and the let me get this, Cornell University, have recently done studies that show really the impacts of habitat loss on our wildlife. 28% of almost all um bumblebees, which are native here, are facing some risk of extinction. And also 50% of our leafcutter bees and 20% of our mason bees are at risk, according to NatureServe. Cornell University, their studies have found that in entire population of birds in North America, there's 29% of them gone. Grassland birds have really suffered the most. Because their populations are down 53%. So grasslands, why are these grassland species, the bumblebee being one of those, why are they so hard, impacted so hard by this habitat loss? And the truth is, it's related to our prairies here. The grasslands really have less than 4% of their original range here remaining. So nine that what 96% is gone. So it kind of is very easy to see how that affects all these grassland species if that's how much is gone. And tall grass prairie is really only one kind of grassland. But in addition, we are affecting our woodlands. So high quality woodlands are disappearing also in relation to the encroachment of invasive non-native species, like the Callery pear in our area. That's a big deal, and also bush honeysuckle. So people that live in our metropolitan areas are probably very familiar with those two species and hearing news about how much those are invading our native spaces. Um, so this is just a kind of an illustration of how those processes are really not just historical, like a long time ago happening, but really within the time span of my mother's life. This is the change that we've seen in our area. So this little red square is the 10-acre property that I live on outside of Kansas City, Missouri, on the west side. So we're in Tonganoxie, Kansas, and here is what it looks like now. That previous slide, oops, sorry, was 40 1941. So, over a little over 80 years ago, I think. So this is kind of an illustration of all this light gray, that's all grassland. So previously, that's how much grassland was here. And now it looks like this. So it's changed from grassland to a lot of residential or a little bit of residential. We're still pretty big, and a lot of those residences now are mowing huge, huge acreages just to keep them more like a big lawn. And then the spaces that aren't managed anymore are becoming more wooded. So the whole environment around here is changing dramatically. And that's what we mean when we talk about habitat loss. We really are changing what is out there for our wildlife. Um, so those two images are available to almost everybody out there in our area. We can access aerial photography back that far through a lot of our county websites. So the hopeful thing about this are gardens. All of those residential landscapes, we have an opportunity there to provide habitat again. This is my front yard. I do live in a rural residential area, so I'm not faced with a lot of the constraints that people in suburban areas have. But in everybody's backyard, we can do whatever we want, really. I still have some mowed lawn that I use because people need spaces too, but the rest of the spaces here are managed for habitat for wildlife. And the nice thing about that is I get to enjoy that part of it too. So it's a lot of fun for me. And it is gorgeous. What really attracted me in the beginning to native plants when I was a very young person going, wow, why aren't people doing this in their gardens? Um, because there's so many varieties, so much color, so much interesting shape and texture that you can add to a garden with native plants. We have a huge variety of native plants that grow in our region here. And that's kind of an interesting thing about native plants is they are particular to wherever you are. So I would encourage everyone just to kind of get started and exploring what was native to your spaces. Now, if you're in the UK, that's a whole different ball game than in my area. Your native plants are going to look way different from my native plants. So learning about native plants in your area is probably the first step to providing habitat. Um, a lot of all of our kind of association between native plants and habitat for pollinators was started by this, a monarch butterfly and a milkweed. A lot of us have heard how important milkweeds are to sustaining monarch butterfly populations. So you can see on in this photo, there's a pink flower, and that is a swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. And the red flower here is called cardinal flower. It's a short-lived perennial that likes wetter spaces, so it grows well with swamp milkweed. Um, you can see there's an adult butterfly on the pink flower in the background, and in the foreground, there's a caterpillar. Both of these parts of the life cycle of this butterfly need this plant in some way, but the adult can use a lot of different things. The caterpillar, on the other hand, really needs milkweeds in particular, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. Um, Birds? What about native plants and birds? Haven't we supported birds for decades with nest boxes and seeds? Yes, we have. Of course, we have. But what did we feed the babies? What a lot of people didn't know, and me included, I didn't understand that until Doug Tallamy came around with a study. He's an entomologist, wrote a couple of books. One of them is Nature's Best Hope, and the other one is Bringing Nature Home, which is really the first one I read, um, where he shared a study he did on chickadees. And he determined in his study that a pair of chickadees, needed 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one brood of eggs to fledglings. That's a lot of caterpillars, a lot of caterpillars. And that's where, and so that's what their babies are eating, those soft, squishy larval stage, which is what a caterpillar is, of different insects. In my garden, I'm also providing native plants as seed. So these birds are in the winter using the seeds that are still in my garden as the bird food. So rather than putting up uh, bird feeders, I'm using the seeds in the garden. But the baby food is where we really will use these native plants. Interestingly, it isn't just birds that are in that need for the insects. All the way up the food chain, that we're relying on this primary food source, which is native plants. They are what supports all the insects, and the insects are what supports the next level, and then the next level, and the next level are supported by the animals below them that are supported by native plants. So it all works together, and native plants are the base, and we need a lot of them to accomplish supporting all of the wildlife in our world. So who are all of these pollinators? And all of these insects have larval stage that all the rest of the world really kind of depends on. And it's the larval stage that really is looking at native plants. Butterflies are, and bees, those are the two that most people think of when they're thinking about pollinators. But also beetles, which is in this middle photo. They depend on the pollen and things from native plants and the other bugs that come to the native plants. Wasps are pollinators, flies are pollinators. Some of our host plants, or one of our host plants, is pollinated by flies and beetles, but also wind. So a lot of things are wind pollinated in my area. A lot of people like me have hay fever that's caused by wind carried pollen. Uh, it doesn't require an insect to move it from one plant to the other. And even some plants, I could be a pollinator just walking through a garden or a native area. I might be moving pollen from one plant to the next on my clothes. So we'll start in looking at some of these pollinators with my favorite, which is butterflies. I'm kind of crazy in that I'll run around chasing a butterfly trying to get a picture for hours sometimes. And in this case, I got a picture of this beautiful, gigantic butterfly called a giant swallowtail. And in citrus groves, this is a pest. But here, it's beautiful. I love it. And you can see in the top photo that it is on a zinnia, not a native plant here. An interesting thing about butterflies and their relationships with plants is that the adult butterfly feeds on nectar. So it has a proboscis, a mouth part that is like a straw. And so they drink nectar, most of our butterflies and moths. But the larval form actually has chewing mouth parts and it needs leaves. It eats leaves. And when I mentioned that this particular butterfly is a pest on citrus, the bottom photo is of the caterpillar of a giant swallowtail, which is the butterfly here. It looks a lot like bird poop. That's a protection, a camouflage technique, because birds wouldn't eat it because it looks like poop. In any case, this picture is taken on a host plant, which is particular to this butterfly. It likes things in the citrus, or its larva is adapted for eating or evolved with this plant to eat its leaves. It eats citrus relative leaves. In this case, this is prickly ash. It grows natively around here. So I've planted it in my garden to provide an opportunity for me to show other people this beautiful little caterpillar and this gigantic butterfly, because I could plant all the zinnias I want for the butterfly, but if I don't have the host plant for the caterpillar, I probably am not going to be supporting that whole population. Most of our butterflies are going to either, well, they migrate like the monarch migrates. Many of them are going to overwinter here as the chrysalis or pupa form. And all insects go through that in some form prior to becoming the caterpillar. So, or the larval form. So we will have some of those chrysalis or pupa in rolled up in leaves, and sometimes it's even an adult that's rolled up in a leaf, or the caterpillar that's rolled up in a leaf. Here's some other caterpillars that have host plant relationships to plants that I put in my garden. On the left here is another monarch on a different milkweed, because there's plenty of different species of milkweeds here. And the monarch, any of those can be used by the monarch caterpillar. At the top is another butterfly caterpillar. The butterfly is called the American lady butterfly. This caterpillar can eat a lot of different leaves, but it prefers things like pussy toes, which is what I have in my garden that supports this caterpillar. On the bottom, you can barely see it, but there's a green caterpillar on a plant called senna. And so that caterpillar eats that plant and is evolved to eat plants like that. So bees, though, those are the ones that a lot of people think of when they are trying to support pollination because they really do carry pollen. They are, and whereas the butterfly is an accidental pollinator, kind of like I would be if I was walking through the garden, they're not using pollen for anything. It's just sticking to them and moving. But a bee, on the other hand, really does use pollen. It's going to eat pollen, it's going to use nectar, both. And most of them are going to overwinter in their larval form, and their nesting habitat is uh, dependent. I mean, their nesting is dependent on having appropriate habitat. So in the case of a honeybee, we know what that looks like. It's a beehive. Um, but for our native bees, it's very different. So honeybees are social. They came from Europe. So here in North America, all the honeybees originated from populations in Europe. They have a queen and a colony. They're called social bees, and they're generally able to collect pollen from any flower. And just like a butterfly, they can get nectar from almost any flower if they have a long enough tongue. So that's a kind of an anatomical thing that limits the kind of habitat they need or nectar they need, flowers they need. But there's another kind of bee, and the vast majority of our native bees are solitary bees. They do not form colonies or hives or anything like that. Bumblebees are social bees, kind of like a honeybee, but unlike a honeybee, that hive, that colony does not overwinter. It is only the queen that lives through the winter. For the bumblebee, that colony, the whole colony dies except for the queen. And she creates the whole life cycle again the next year. Um, Solitary bees, on the other hand, are just the female butterfly or female bee going around and utilizing whatever habitat is existing, if the correct habitat is existing, to create the next generation. So they're going to gather pollen and form a ball in a stem or a hole in the ground, or some other kind of cavity. And then they're going to form that ball, they're going to lay their egg on it, they're going to seal that off, and they're going to keep doing that until their life ends. And sometimes they can only collect a certain kind of pollen. So that's called a specialist bee. And the bee on the bottom here is called a mallow bee. They specialize on hibiscus pollen, and they are a solitary bee. In spite of looking a lot like a bumblebee, these are not bumblebees. They are totally different. They don't form colonies. They're solitary, and the female will only collect pollen from hibiscus flowers. There are many bees that are specialist bees, although the vast majority, I think, are not so much that they can collect pollen from a variety of sources. Um, in North America, we have close to 4,000 species of native bees, and their life cycle truly is dependent on the correct habitat, and sometimes the correct pollen. So let me see what we are here. Let's talk a little bit about that cavity nesting versus ground nesting. You can see from these statistics that the majority of our native bees are ground nesting bees. That would include our bumblebees, which are a colony forming bee or a social bee. Um, so they tunnel into the ground, and these are pretty elaborate, and they don't bother us at all. Almost none of them sting or are aggressive. They're not protecting a habitat. But providing habitat in these gardens can be super helpful because some of our bees are as small as about a quarter of an inch or like a grain of rice, and they can only fly short distances, like 200 feet, and they have to find everything in that space, uh, or they won't have what they need to survive. So, being able to find both the nesting habitat, the correct kind of pollen, and all of that within the same area is super important for some of our native bees. And those ground nesting bees, I always think of um, the yellow jackets, or that people will come, they come out and sting people. Um, that isn't going to happen with the vast majority of our native bees. The ground nesting bees, we walk over those nests all the time. We squash them, destroy them. They do not care. This is one hard-working mama bee who is only interested in accomplishing her task before she dies. She's not protecting anything. She's too busy to really think about that.
Patty, we had a question in the chat that might be
Sure.
good to address just at this particular moment.
Uh-huh.
Danny asks, are the bee hotels I've seen at the store good for solitary bees?
Yes, they support those cavity nesting, the stem nesting bees. I don't use them, mostly because they take a lot of maintenance that I'm not going to have time to do. They're very cute. They also support some other stem or cavity nesters that are not bee pollinators. And this is going to sound real scary, but wasps, some of our wasps like that, and ants will sometimes get in there. Some of the stem kind of indications of stem nesting is actually ants going in and out. But some of our wasps are just as tiny as our native bees. They're doing the same thing. And the vast majority of our native wasps are also solitary. So I'm going to give you some resources about some native bees, at least in North America. Sorry for UK folks. I'm not real familiar with some of the UK native species. But in this case, I would say yes, your bee hotels are going to help some of these species. About 30% of them will use habitats like that. Different sizes, all different kinds of those bee hotel materials. So hopefully that answered that question. Okay, so how do we go about providing some of these things for the bees? This is a picture of when my garden was absolutely beautiful at the end of May. This is kind of the idea um, for providing habitat. This is a spring picture that you can see there's a lot of different kinds of flower, a lot of different kinds of foliage, and diversity really is the key to providing that. And being able to tolerate this kind of complexity in a garden can sometimes be a learning curve. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it's a lot of fun. You learn a lot about it. When we're in these suburban environments, a lot of times this can be a challenge for HOAs, our homeowners associations, to really like this. So that requires a little bit more maintenance on the gardener part. Uh, but providing all of this variety in a small area is really what you're trying to do. And I would shoot for at least three species blooming per season, and include as many host plants as you can within that for the monarch butterflies and the other butterflies that have particular host plants. Um, this is another concept, is the minimizing mulch. And that's kind of referring to that ground nesting uh, kind of bee that really wants to have bare dirt a lot of times, not always the kind of soil you would think as good soil. Sometimes they want really compacted soil, very sandy soil, things like that. But just not having a ton of mulch under your plants really helps. So the way that I do that is once these gardens get mature, I can not use so much mulch except on the very edges. That's where I tend to put it. just to clean that edge up. And then I interplant and have shorter things underneath some of the bigger plants. Takes a long time to kind of accomplish that, but it's worth the effort because you really will notice different things in your garden. This photo was taken much later in the season, kind of across a walkway from the previous photo. This was at the end of June. And again, very pretty. Every year, these gardens are different. It's really kind of up to me as the gardener to kind of see what's going on and make changes if I don't like it uh, every year. It doesn't take a lot of my time, though. It's a lot easier than you think once you kind of get used to it. This is what the garden, this kind of gives you a concept of the season-wide variety in here. And all of these seasons are important for there to be blooming flowers, all different kinds of foliage. And even in the winter, this kind of habitat is super important for our pollinators. This is a little bit closer winter habitat. Many of the insect pupa, like we said before, will overwinter in leaf litter. You'll hear the term leave the leaves. I still clean my walkways off, and if I have large areas of lawn, I don't want big patches of leaves there. I'll use a rake and put those in the garden. We remove fallen stems. If they start to just look real floppy, just to keep things a little bit tidy. This was after an ice storm, and it just happened to be particularly pretty. But granted, I do not like winter at all. Thankfully, it's almost done. But I will cut the stalks that flop over. And when I do cut, I try to leave things as tall as possible. And sometimes I'm creating a shape with the stalks. I want stalks to be at least, 2 feet if I can, leave that much. And then I'm going to reuse some of the material in the garden, cutting it as little as possible because if there are things nesting in that stem, um, I want it still to be there. And I might gather those and store them someplace whole for a long time. But even if you don't do that part, leaving as much of your stems as possible and not entirely cleaning everything out of the garden is really helpful. Um, it's that in itself is a big, big good thing to do. It does look messy though, I will tell you. So really kind of I concentrate on keeping those edges clean, not letting things flop over edges. Um, one other thing to say is that birds also use some of this material that gets broken down. It gets softer. They'll use that for nesting material. So this accomplishes more than you might think, trying to tolerate that or get the people around you to tolerate it. So some of the things I did mention, we want at least three blooming species per season. So I'm going to go through real quick that these are some of the species that I like and I used. The Latin name here only because common names get really confusing, but we have wild strawberry at the top. We have Packera, or it has changed names recently, but golden groundsel, and then blue phlox. Um, Monarda bradburyana, it has a lot of different names, but it's a short bee balm that I really like. It blooms a little earlier. And then Golden Alexander and Rose Verbena are the ones on the bottom. Very beautiful combinations for spring. Summer, you have lots and lots of possibilities. That's when most of your flowering is happening. And there are, I would say, if I was going to make sure I included a couple things, you'd want to do a milkweed like Asclepias tuberosa, which does not spread underground, real easy to control, really nice. It's called butterfly weed or butterfly milkweed. Real pretty color, very orange, bright. Sometimes you can get yellows um, out of that particular species. But blazing stars, these Liatris species, those are some of the really wonderful things to include. And I've got two species listed as summer. On the next page, you'll see another one, but Liatris liculistalis is meadow blazing star. It blooms a little bit earlier, and then here's another bee balm with the yellow flower and the gray butterfly there, and then some of our prairie clovers there at the bottom. Some more summer favorites are penstemons, the purple cone flowers, the echinaceas, the rudbeckias or the black-eyed Susans, and another blazing star, like I said, that blooms really late, and it catches the monarch migration as it's going back towards Mexico through here, through the middle part of the country. This is Liatris aspera, or sometimes it's called button blazing star. I call it rough blazing star, but it's like end of August, August 26th, I think is when that photo was taken. Let me see where we can go from here. These are our fall favorites. Don't forget about fall because that is one of the most beautiful times in the garden around here. There are a lot of blooming plants that you can include in that September timeframe, October even. So the purple picture here is the aromatic aster or Symphyotrichum oblongifolium. That one usually starts blooming, in October, sometimes past October into November. It'll get snow on it, and you will still see butterflies, little butterflies coming to that. The sneezeweeds are really nice. They're big, lots of, some of them are big. This little one here is an annual species that stays really small. And then goldenrods. They used to be the ones that people thought caused the hay fever, but in actuality, they do not. They have very heavy pollen that has to be moved by an insect. So it's not one of those air or wind pollinated species. Grasses and seed heads are just nice to include. They include a lot of texture this time of year, but they do support skipper butterflies in as a host plant and nesting habitat. So let's see. We're going to go on to some of the resources, both that I used for this presentation and where you can find information about them. Again, these are more local to here, but in Xerces Society is a wonderful resource for information about any kind of insect, but particularly bee conservation practices. The Heather Holm books, and some of them are listed in this little image here. This is an older catalog from 2020, but it was a great example of some of the information you can find in some of our native plant nursery catalogs. This one was from a company called Prairie Moon Nursery. But also we have some other nonprofits one is Grow Native and the Missouri Prairie Foundation. They have a lot of really good information about native plants. Also, like if you're starting a native plant garden, um, they have some kind of starter designs there that's really helpful for getting people going on native plant gardening. We have a local organization in Kansas City called Deep Roots. They're really awesome. The Kansas Native Plant Society, I must put a call out about them because, of course, I'm the president. Anyway, we are just a whole bunch of native plant people. That's all we do is talk about native plants, explore natural environments, find native plants to help engage people with the native plants just in this Kansas region. Missouri Botanical Garden has a secret tool that everybody would love to know about. That is their plant finder. So on the Missouri Botanical Garden online site, there's if you Google a Latin name on their site, they will bring up, if they have it in the garden, bring that a page up, and on that page is a little speaker, and some nice man will say that Latin name for you so you can hear how it's pronounced. It is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Again, Heather Holm here. And then a good friend of mine, her name is Betsy Betros, an entomologist who lives around here. She wrote a book called Butterflies of the Kansas City Region, which is super helpful. Native plant nursery catalogs, like I said, are great. One last thing, native plant sales happen all through the season. Local nurseries, we actually do a fundraiser sale almost every weekend in the summer here at Botanical Belonging. City Roots Nursery is a local nursery, so Wild Natives, and then Missouri Wildflowers is a regional nursery. And that, my friends, is all I have for you today. I hope if you have any questions, I have some time left to be able to answer.
You do. Thank you so much. So we have one asking about if there are any resources that list the air pollinated species.
Yeah, wind pollination. I have not ever looked into that, about a resource for that. Um, hmm. Yeah, I don't off the top of my head know one. Hadn't thought about that. I really need to find that though, because ragweed is one. Most of the grasses are wind pollinated. I know that. Uh, so they don't really depend on bees or insects for moving the pollen. Um, does that help a little bit? I don't have a resource though.
Yeah, I think Samantha was just hoping that there might be something. She said her family has horrible allergies, and so
Yeah.
she was hoping to avoid those that
Yeah.
may be triggering those allergies, I
I
think.
would say mostly it's going to be the grasses and ragweed, which most of us know about that. It's a native plant. There are two species we see. Real important to birds. They love the seeds. So if you're trying to support bobwhite quail, you want ragweed. Anyway, interesting. Good question. I need to look that one up.
Thanks. Anyone else have a question? You can drop it in the chat or raise your hand so we can call on you. Well, I will ask one. I mentioned it in the chat, but my my neighbor's not super thrilled with the more wilder, less manicured look of my front lawn. I've been in my house almost 4 years now, and immediately set upon digging up my front yard. So, um, you have any tips for people who might want to have a native garden in their front yard and maybe are in an area that is still embracing the concept?
Yeah. I think the one single most important thing that makes these gardens look approachable, and acceptable to most people is an edge. Whether that edge is created with a fence or a single species, like just what you would typically see in a more um, manicured landscape would be one species, a lot of one species. So really mimicking that, at least on the edge, is a real helpful way. And then being able to see, and in my bigger gardens, I usually use a real simple method, which when I create a garden, I might use a smothering technique, which cardboard mulch kind of thing. Uh, and that's just at the beginning to get rid of as many weeds as possible. And then what I'm going to do is dig a trench around the edge, and I'm going to fill that trench with a real big bunch of mulch. It's going to be real thick right there. That makes it real easy for me to keep grass and other things out of that edge. And it really defines the garden. It says behind this line, there's garden. And that kind of helps change the perception of any kind of wild stuff. It says, yes, that is a different space. Um, and I think that is one of the most helpful things. And then the second is don't be afraid to clip. If stuff starts to fall, clip it. just clip it off. And most of our plants will then branch a little bit and get a little shorter, and they'll still do their thing if they can, if there's enough time. But clipping is kind of a people forget that really these plants developed in environments where they were grazed in some way, really clipped back often. And so they have a response to that that really is not unattractive at all. So those are two things that I would say would be helpful.
Yeah, and Faith says that she put some signs up that said that she was feeding pollinators, and that
Yeah.
seemed to help, just being more on the educational and informative side of things.
Yep. That is a really good one.
Yeah. And Marcia is asking, so you kind of went through the plants that bloom at different times of the year.
Hmm.
Is there a way to plan that out? Like, how would you suggest people plan their garden so that they have flowers blooming for the whole season?
Right. I think just using those resources now, this is a Grow Native resource guide, which isn't really going to help you with that, but Grow Native, if you're local, grownative.org, um, has some beginning kind of landscape plans. But I would look at those and then start to kind of be critical and go, well, does that give me three species that bloom in every season? So you might start investigating different species that way. So when I don't do a lot of I used to just mull over things for hours and hours and hours before I would plant one plant, and then I might think about it for a month. All winter I'd be walking by going, no, that's not going to work because that's not going to match with the plant next to it. What I find is if I just think I'm going to plant a whole bunch of species, but I'm going to concentrate on that edge, and I'm going to think about um how tall that edge is. I want shorter plants there. And then I'm just going to move back. And I'm not going to worry so much of that about planning that out so much as just knowing shorter, medium, tall, and kind of make sure the tall aren't close to the edge. And then make sure in that I've got three species blooming at every part of the year. So, except for winter, we're not going to get much to bloom now. Sorry to say. But anyway, that's kind of the way I would go about it. And nowadays, and I shoot that plan, that I thought in 2015 when I started all my gardens here. I was, just very, very concerned about every little detail that I did. Turns out all this time later, I'm looking at it and going, wow, there's almost nothing left there that I originally planted. It transforms, and yet you see the whole time it's really beautiful. I just I don't think I'm going to ever be the kind of gardener that wants to set it and forget it. I'm gonna walk by and go, I don't know. I might have to move that. As long as it's not a plant that takes like 4 years to mature. I might think a little bit longer before I did something like that. I get used to it after a while. So I hope that helps. To
Yeah.
me, it's a long relationship.
And Faith suggested the Prairie Moon Nursery, which has a great tool that you can use. And Lisa is asking if there are some good plants for beginners that you might want to choose your first time out.
Yeah, I one of the really the ones I put in my those lists that I had, those are pretty reliable beginner kind of plants. Um, most of them are. Uh, some of the more common species are going to be, that you hear about, like purple coneflower. You're not going to miss pollinators with purple coneflower. Um, and Rudbeckias, I say, are probably not the most. easy beginner plants, but Coreopsis, I didn't have any Coreopsis in there. That's a really good one. Um, in this picture that's on the screen right now, that is gray-headed coneflower, which is not an echinacea, it's a Ratibida. Um, blooms like crazy, but it's 4 feet tall. So when you're talking 4 feet tall, I think you start to get a little complex, to use unless you have a big area. And then these are going to be great. And then in the foreground, there's one of our blazing stars that I like. That one's Liatris ligulistulus. Again, that one's kind of floppy. So, you just really, I even struggle with the floppiness of blazing stars. But what I find is their use, I mean, having them is invaluable for having fun with pollinators because they really love them. There's too much pollen and too much nectar not to have every pollinator go to that.
Great. And Danny suggested going to your recycling center for cardboard.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
have one here, but of course, that's a resource available pretty much everywhere where
Yep.
there's retail. So check that out if you're looking for a way to start killing off your yard and being able to plant those natives. I know what I did was a little bit of a complimentary thing, I guess. I had a space I wanted to have a vegetable garden. And so I did a little lasagna gardening. I put down
Yeah.
some cardboard and then the grass that I dug up, I threw on top of that cardboard as organic material, and it seemed to work out pretty well. But not everyone wants to go out there and dig, and it is not easy.
Well,
So,
and I would add that, if you wanted to quickly start a garden with an edge without having to dig, if you can afford things like rocks, and you can just do the cardboard and do the edge, like put those rocks right on the edge of it, and then fill behind it with a whole bunch of mulch, and that is like instant garden, You only have to wait a few weeks for that to smother most of our common yard grasses, with the exception of Bermuda grass, which I feel for anybody who has a yard like that they're trying to get rid of Bermuda grass. It's bad stuff.
yeah, Ooh. Um, so Lisa's asking if you have a newsletter. And also we had a question about your native plant sales coming
Mhm.
up. So I don't
Mhm.
know if you have a link you want to throw in the chat for both of those, maybe, Patty?
Well, that would have been smart, wouldn't it? I'm so bad at this.
Well,
Uh,
that's okay. If,
you
if
go
you
to
wanna find those, I'll kind of wrap us up here while you're doing that, if that's
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Let me see if I can find that. I don't know
Yeah.
what's on your screen now, so
It's still your presentation.
okay, good, good, good. See
And apparently something's happening outside that my dogs are not happy about.
if I... My dog had to go somewhere else because he will not let me have a presentation. All right, let's see.
So just
Well,
really want to thank everyone for coming today. We had the biggest group yet I think we've ever had, and
wow.
it's a great community. Everybody's sharing resources. We love to see that. And again, apologies to our UK friends, our Scottish friends, but it gives you a little bit of an idea about maybe what kind of resources to look for in your community, and how you can sort of go about it. Uh, and the native plant sale link is there in the chat for you.
I think I have a
And
yeah. I think I have a link to if you go to our website, which is botanicalbelonging.org, you can actually join our email list, and that gets you our emails. We don't do them in the winter in the off season, but we start to do them pretty regularly in April, March and April.
Great. Well, next time, we will be doing, let's see, what are we doing? We have so many things. So we have a couple of podcast hosts who are going to be joining us on the 19th at noon Central Time. And they'll be talking about starting your sustainability journey. I think everybody here is probably already started theirs, but this is a fun podcast that these ladies produce, and we're going to have a little bit of a different format. We're going to go kind of a interview style. We'll kind of be having a live podcast, I guess, per se. And so hope you can join us for that as well. And I think with that, we're getting close to time. Any last burning questions? Right. Well, you can find our webinars on Eventbrite and also on our website, on our calendar. So hope to see you at a future one. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. This was great.
Awesome.
Thanks, Marcia.